thanks for joining me again for another episode of Leading Edge Interviews. I am Super Dave. Today, I'm going to be talking with a very engaging young man by the name of Ed Levitsky, who is the mastermind behind the new band, the Anchoret, and their debut album, It All Began With Loneliness. He's a really cool dude, and he's got other talents besides simply music. So we're going to get into that. Keep in mind, third episode, we changed format up ever so slightly, tried some new things. Along with trying some new things was some sabotage instigated by software. So my audio is maybe not quite up to snuff. I'll just apologize for that now. That's going to be fixed in future episodes. Bear with me. Remember, we're a little bit under construction. It's a learning process. We'll figure things out as we go along. Anyway, to the interview. Ed Levitsky of the Anchoret right now.
Thank you for joining me, Ed. I really appreciate your time tonight. So we've got a new band here, and I understand you are pretty much the core of the band, the originator of everything. But tell me a little bit about it. Tell me about your background prior to the Anchoret.
Well, hi. Thank you very much for having me on this show. Thank you for giving me giving me some time to talk about the Anchoret, which is it's my baby. I've had the idea of bridging prog rock and metal for years now, because it's music I grew up listening to, records from my father. But then I was part of several local metal bands here, black metal bands, a couple of death metal bands, a couple of melodic stuff too, as a bassist and as a guitar player. I just wanted more of a creative outlet, and I really wanted to bridge that love of both of those worlds, and that's how it came up to be. I ran out of excuses during the pandemic, during COVID. The album is called It All Began With Loneliness because it really did begin there. I absolutely was looking for an outlet, something to express myself, something to keep my sanity. It was really tough on me. I was in a new, I moved recently, restarting life, restarting everything. And then this thing hit. And so I was really at a low point in my life. So that's where the Anchoret comes in, because I felt like I was living this ascetic kind of lifestyle too. So as you can see, the Anchoret and It All Began With Loneliness, if for me the pandemic had a flag, that would be that logo at that cover album of the debut album.
Yeah. I honestly, I think you and a lot of people, because it was a weird time, and I've, because of when I started doing this, I've been able to witness a lot of different reactions and hear a lot of different reactions to that on the part of creative types like yourself, that for a lot of them, it propelled a good bit of creativity. I guess the old adage that suffering in a certain sense and discord can feed the creative juices a little bit. The classic example I always use is Fleetwood Mac's Rumors.
Yes.
What for a long time was the biggest selling album of all time, and holy crap, they were a hot mess throughout the entire creation of that album, and yet it seemed to come out with something. And it seems like that's been the same for you, that it turned into fueling your creative juices and talking about those influences of yours. Like, I know, at least to my ear, some of the stuff that on the surface there probably is Opeth and Porcupine Tree. You're nodding, so I guess I am close. So
Guilty as charged. Guilty as charged. Pink Floyd all over. It's part of the DNA, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people, when they bring in influences, everyone has a different kind of vision of it. Everyone has the same balls and and put their taste into things, right? So I've only used the same raw materials as everyone else. It's just that I kind of went about it in a different way, and it was important for me to, if I did include something like a saxophone or flute, for example, it would become part of the DNA of the album. That was the most important thing for me. It wasn't just two measures of gospel vocals here and then we never talk about it.
Yeah.
It was very important to kind of create a soundscape that meant something.
Yeah, and I think you really did a good job of that. There's clearly a lot of varied influences in that stew of a mix of yours, and yet the album is exceedingly cohesive. It doesn't feel like we just tacked on a piece of this and a piece of that or whatever.
Thank you. I appreciate
It
it.
absolutely has a flow to it. And I got to say, speaking on someone who, all right, I grew up in the '80s, so this was more common back then. But I love to hear somebody actually employ the saxophone again.
Oh, yeah. I think you're going to see the saxophone more and more in metal and progressive music. I have a feeling that it's become one of those instruments that, brings this new flavor. But again, I'm really hoping that whoever does bring in the saxophone or all this, horns and trumpets, the new Haken uses trumpets, for
Yeah,
example, there's a lot more of that they don't just like settle for bringing it as a feature. It's not
right.
featuring saxophone. It should be part of the DNA. It should say something. And for me, it's the saxophone, where it came from, that was me listening to Crime of the Century all the time, forever.
Yeah,
That's where I heard it the first time. Of course, it's Pink Floyd, and of course, you can find it in pretty much all new wave, '80s bands, which are, it's also great. But Crime of the Century, that's what inspired me to bring it in, and I've always had that since I was very little. That I always wanted to kind of explore that, and I'm lucky enough to have found a soundscape that kind of fits that mold now. So I'm very lucky, and I'm very happy to have employed it.
yeah, nice. Yeah, because it honestly it harkens back. Like I hadn't thought of Crime of the Century until you said that, but in my mind too, I think of things like Alan Parsons Project. And most of the times back then, if you heard saxophone as guest on an album, you usually could look in the liner notes and find the names Mel Collins, who
Okay.
seemed to be always there. So it's like it was a very cool moment to go, wow, saxophone in the middle of a prog metal segment, a prog metal song. I'm like, how cool is that? Because nobody's done that. So I like that blending. I'm curious, among the mix there of bands, like a lot of the ones you've named so far, you go, yeah, yeah, yeah. What might surprise us to hear as a big influence within this album?
Oh wow, I really did throw in everything but the kitchen sink into here. Surprise, I'm not sure. I think everyone surprises me by finding influences in there of, things that they kind of think back, and this reminds them of things. I've discovered by reading the reviews of the album, I've discovered a lot of bands, like the vocals reminded people of Barren Earth, for example. It's a band that I wasn't familiar with, and I'm loving it.
Yeah,
A lot of stuff like that. But there's a lot of King Crimson, there's a lot of Cynic. One influence I can throw in there is maybe Queen. That doesn't really come up like, right away.
yeah,
But that's, the guitar player is a big fan of Queen, and that's what he grew up listening to, and he grew up playing that. So the last track on the album is a very personal one for me. It's called Stay, and it's about my friend, who is fighting soft tissue sarcoma. And it's a very, very personal, very dear song for me and for him. And I don't know, the one song that I really wanted to kind of put in the DNA of into that, because that's the way I wanted to say it, was, Who Wants to Live Forever by Queen, which is this big, gigantic song with a big, gigantic solo in there that kind of even goes a little bit too long, even. And it has that DNA of that song specifically, and that solo inside that track, Stay. So I'm guessing Queen would be my choice of surprising influence.
nice, very cool. I actually noticed for the video for Forsaken, the top comment in there was a cool one where it said it's like David Bowie meets Between the Buried and Me with some heavy sax parts mixed in. I'm like, okay, you know
Yeah,
what?
I
Nailed it.
screenshotted that one, and I'm gonna hang it on the wall next to all the other pictures right there.
Right, have that framed, have it done in cross stitch and framed on the wall.
Absolutely. Yeah, will do.
So you anticipated one of my questions about the idea of it being a personal album with its roots, especially in the title and the name of the band, as far as the time and place when it was written. So it sounds like you've been working on it for quite a while, because we've opened things up a little bit since then. I'm not sure where you were during that time, but it's clear to me you were really wearing your heart on your sleeve in terms of the construction of this album.
I try to, of course. I mean, this whole I started bringing in a lot of my personal. I wanted to have something to say, and I
Yeah.
had something to say during that album. So of course it's become personal. But some of these ideas of bridging and using prog rock and metal, as I said, I had those for a long time. It's just that I felt like I hadn't had that push to kind of actually say something, actually go out there and put myself out there, put a little piece of you, because it is you at that moment. That's who you are when you
Yeah.
release an album. And the whole story of it is because when I did dabble, when I played music with my friends, with colleagues, and with different bands, most people were a little bit more close-minded. So when I did talk about, I wanted to incorporate a little bit of saxophone, I wanted to incorporate a little bit about Pink Floyd, and believe it or not, people were extremely close to that.
Yeah.
And those ideas could have festered, but I've kept developing them.
Yeah.
I've kept developing them, and I kept looking for more of an audience that would be a little bit more open-minded. And unfortunately, that's what happened. I've never found it. I've never found colleagues that I could play with, that were maybe a little bit more open to those ideas.
Yeah.
So you know what? I said, I need this. This is a good occasion for me to pour my heart and soul out. I'm going to see where this goes. And I started working on those and making them what they are today, on my own. I've never expected to collaborate with so many amazing people. That's just the miracle of that time, that period, and the incredible luck that I had. And I've put as much honesty into the songs as possible, because I think that's the most important ingredient in music. You have to be honest when you have to say something. And musically, it grew up, and that thing that I was lacking, that human connection that I was looking for, surprisingly, it all began with loneliness, but we're very far from there today. And I feel so privileged to have worked and collaborated on this album with amazing people who I consider great friends today, even if we're oceans apart. And that's the power of music. It really is.
Yeah. I'm very curious about this too, because despite the isolation of the times, you pulled together this group of collaborators that are apparently scattered across the globe. So I'm curious, like, one, tell us a little bit about who they are, and two, how did you link up with these guys? How did you pull this together to be able to make this happen, in far-flung edges of the world?
Well, I think it's the internet is a beautiful place. It connects people, but it divides people, unfortunately, as well. But in my case, I was really looking for that connection, so I was searching for apps. There's a lot of apps looking for musicians, and you start chatting, you start developing ideas. But of course, you have to show something. You have to show your effort in the whole mix as well. So I had a pretty finished demo. I've been working on it on and off for at least a year or more. And I was starting to recruit those musicians, where to replace all the really terrible parts that I did and all the fake instruments that I've used with real musicians. And what I found is that people, maybe due to the pandemic, maybe this is just how lucky I got, it was the great, the good moment to do it. People were very open to it. They felt the honesty in the songs, and they wanted to contribute as well, and go above and beyond, through those apps, through the internet, through Facebook, through message boards, through Reddit, all of those. And I don't know, socially awkward, I guess, because it's a pandemic. You never know, I'm in a new town, everything's very new. I'm just, I've got this anxiety. So going through the internet kind of helped me build up a little bit, my confidence, and
Right.
talking with people who I was surprised enjoyed my music, because honestly, I couldn't really ask. I just was working on it in a silo, hoping for the best.
Right.
But in all honesty, I thought I would be pissing off both the metal community, because that's my experience from it when I was, presenting the music, but also the prog community can also be very kind of close-minded and, with the heavier elements. So I thought I would be bridging being in between those worlds, and instead of bridging people, I would just you know piss both of them off. So seeing that people like Andy Tillison, who were available to work and I was lucky enough to contact, were very excited about this music, kind of started making me feel like, oh, okay, I never expected this, but I feel like we have something interesting. And I was open-minded enough for them to kind of, basically, I built a sandbox and I asked them to play in it, and the performances that they've delivered was so much above and beyond. And we kept contact as well, which is also above and beyond. um so that's how you present something that's final. You present something, you have to have like a more or less, you know an idea that's honest, that's more or less complete, where and you have to be open-minded when you approach other people who are experts in their fields, and have to be open for what they can deliver as well, what they can kind of contribute. And what they did was incredible, and everything's on, all the performances are on the album. Not all the songs unfortunately made it, but
Sure.
that's going to be in our box for maybe future projects.
Yeah.
uh, but what we did deliver is, just judging by the amount of support we've received so far, is nothing. I'm over. I've never expected anything like this.
Yeah. And you get a nice collection of people there. It looks like pretty varied in terms of what they do and what they're into, but they really came through for you. Because I know, like you were saying, you wrote all of this and you had placeholder parts for the instruments that weren't your natural instruments. And these guys came in and basically added their own takes on those parts to a large extent. I mean, that means they're interpreting what you put down. How closely did they interpret it, and where did you find them surprisingly even going above and beyond what you thought you could expect? Like, what song do you think really stood out as the one where you went, wow, okay, I didn't see it go in that direction, and they really nailed it?
Oh wow! I think every day where I got tracks back was an incredible day. It made my week, every day. And but the biggest shock and awe I've gotten was, there's a couple of things I didn't write. For example, vocals was, you can't really write vocals, and you can't really and then ask someone to pour their heart out. It's just
Yeah.
not something I believe in, to be honest. And including gospel vocals. So when Nimiwari was invited to sing, I said, this is basically like the DNA of Dark Side of the Moon. I want you to make your own version of that. I think it would fit. I don't know. Let's try something. That's basically what my vision was. And she delivered and a half, honestly, because it's a one-shot take, apparently, with a lot of back vocals that were an afterthought as well. And that, to this day, sometimes when my confidence is low as a musician, I go back and I just listen to that, and it's still just as inspiring.
Yeah. Well, I think that speaks a lot to what you created, that it was able to inspire performances that were not only in sync with you, but enhanced what you had already brought to the table. And I think that's an impressive level of synergy to achieve via distance.
I appreciate that a lot. And there's a lot of work that went into it, but I just don't remember the work, because it was just like a routine thing you did. And there were so many versions and so many choices that you make, but I just feel extremely lucky, because that's honestly what I've retained from all of that experience. I don't even remember the hard work that it took. So
Yeah.
I just know that it took a while, and it was one day at a time. There were a couple of frustrations, but they are so much outweighed by all the talent that, all the tracks that I received from all these talented people who collaborated. And in a way, I was in a position where I was very low in my life, and through this music, they grew, like, I grew with that music, and I grew as a person, and I grew. Those songs were my friends, and listening to them today in today's context, they're already grown and they're different than from what I remember writing them, you know. So honestly, I'm glad that this music spoke to people. I'm hoping that they've kind of um you know got, got in got inspired by the fact that it's very naive, the fact that it's very honest,
Hmm.
because that's what it is. It's just me taking small steps in something that I wasn't sure I could do, and it worked.
That's amazing in my mind that you describe it in some ways as naive. I certainly agree with honest because I think that's what has made it successful. I think, and probably to a large extent, how you connected with those collaborators, that they were able to interpret what you gave them in a way that, again, enhanced it. Naive, maybe. There are parts of that maybe judging yourself through your own lens, but there's a part of me that says I hear a maturity in those songs, in that music, that
I
it
feel like there's
astounding
power.
when it's a debut album. I mean, like, holy smokes, like this comes across like, Michael Ackerfeld just put out his newest, opus with Opeth, if I can have words that sound similar. It doesn't strike me as a debut album in that sense.
I think there's power in naivety. There's power in being naive because it's your first steps and you're amazed by everything. Picasso, that's what he said at the end of his life. He said that all his life he's been trying to draw like he was a child. You're searching for that innocence because that's where, where all your dreams, you lose them with time. You lose that innocence and you're searching for it. And I think that what was captured in this debut album was exactly that. It was the first steps into a world that's into two worlds that I barely knew, and I had high hopes for sure. I was trying my best, but there was always this aspect of not guessing yourself and just going with, this is my guts. I'm not sure what scale or chord or any of this jazz stuff is. I just know that I kind of sounds like jazz. I'm not sure if it works or not, and I feel that that's what also adds to the whole honesty in the songs, in the music.
Yeah. I've heard it said many times, music is feeling, given a form, so to speak. And, if you are creating something true to your feelings, it's going to be honest. And if it's maybe something that hasn't been, touched by cynicism or gotten, so to speak, bored with things. So you were in these two new situations. So I think a lot of that enhances that aspect of it. It's fresh and it's honest. And, I think that goes a long way towards creating good, solid music. And I think you achieved that there. And I know that's got to be interesting as well because you created it from an instrumental standpoint, and then you brought in Sylvain Auclair to put some lyrics to it, put some vocals to it.
Yes.
And I'm curious, how did that process work when you were doing that? Did you pretty much go, here's the music, do something, or did you have some notes, some suggestions, give him a little bit of framework to play in that he then had to, embellish?
It's a great story, actually. Sylvain is a good dear friend of mine from Montreal. He's I'm his number one fan. I've been for quite a while. He's got amazing projects. Everything he does, he's in pretty much all the cover bands. He's got a Pink Floyd cover band, Supertramp cover band as well.
Wow.
But he also plays in prog metal bands like Heaven's Cry, which is something I grew up listening to, and Carcius as well. Amazing, amazing projects. Incredible bassist, incredible musician all around, great songwriter. So, I've been a fan forever, and he was my trump card at the back of my mind. I was looking, what kind of vocals was I looking for? And I wanted clean vocals. I wanted something that could convey the most of emotion without being angry, because sure, it all began with loneliness, is about isolation, but it's also about that escapism. There's always a positive message that I really wanted. So that's how I presented it to Sylvain. And I presented to Sylvain, I knew he was my trump card. I didn't want him to say no. I've created, he was the last piece of the puzzle, as they say, right? He was the last person to embark on this journey. So the demo was pretty much complete. And when I sent those over, I expected, I sent one song at a time, a couple of songs. I didn't want to bombard him with everything as well. And he was so enthusiastic to the songs. He was very receptive, and he already imagined stories, and he wanted to bring a lot of himself. And as I said, earlier, I believe that singer should, vocalist should bring in his own experiences, and he was also living through a hard time during the pandemic as a professional musician.
Sure.
So he had a lot to say as well, and that coincided with a lot of what I had to say. But there was a couple of situations where, I had stories per song that I wanted to kind of tell, and he politely listened and politely did his own thing, but he still did retain his, the whole feeling of everything, because that's all we can write about. He had, to me, a gargantuan task, because those songs meant something to me, but I want them to mean something to everyone, and to write that as a writer, to me, is incredible to see. That last song is a personal song to me, and it will be forever about my friend. But it's the way that Sylvain approached it, the way that Sylvain wrote about it, was a lot of him in there too. And and you should analyze it however you want, even if you know that this is specifically about a friend who's, dying from cancer. It could mean so much more to so many other people. It's all about, perspective, and he brought that, and it was his own thing on some songs. And we were compatible on every single song. As I said, I think you have to be open-minded and let the professionals do their work too. It's my baby, but I was willing, wanting it to be our baby. You have to be that open. So Sylvain really came back with just amazing lyrics and amazing words and amazing vocal lines. I was expecting maybe a demo with maybe a couple of harmonies. He came back with 40 tracks per song. I've things I've never even heard. He caught on to the cynic influences that I kind of wrote in, and he went all out with the vocoder, and there's a couple of Muse influences, I think. I'm not sure where he brought those in, but that reminds me of Muse a lot. All sorts of things that he has its own library, and of music that he enjoys, and that also added to the pot.
Yeah, he really nailed it, I think, as far as putting vocals in that just mesh with the music. It feels like it was composed as a whole, all at once, more so than it does, that he came in and did something after the music was put together. And the emotion that he conveys, I think, really strikes a tone well.
Yeah, he cared. He cared, and it showed. I mean, that's all you can ask for from musicians you play with, collaborate with.
Well, it sounds to like an extent. I mean, this, I think, the concepts and the emotion behind the album have such a universal, connection for anybody. One that went through the pandemic, but two that's experienced times of isolation and times of loneliness and all that. And I think that the fact that everybody can relate to that on some level, and especially at the time you were creating this, I think must be, to a large extent, what contributes to how it's being so almost universally praised. At least everything I've seen so far, the reviews have been exceedingly positive. Like just gushing, and you're talking about a debut album halfway through the year that's getting mentions for album of the year consideration. So, I think what you hit upon was something that really connects with people, and it connected really well with your collaborators, which I think then just communicates to the rest of us that are sitting back listening.
I'm absolutely overwhelmed by all the support. Nothing of this was planned.
Yeah.
If only I've known. Maybe I wouldn't be in such a dark place too. But to be honest, I think the one thing I'm extremely proud, and the way that this album is received musically, but also the message behind the music is something that's very important to us, and it's very unmetal if you think about it, because it's a very positive message. As dire as, the music and dramatic it is, and I know I'm going for, all out dramatic music in there, but as much as it goes there, there's always positivism, and there's always, like, lyrics that are stating that, you know you can burn the world down, but you're you want to save it, you want to do good. And I think that it was this healing factor that we were looking for. I think Sylvain more than, but the most, we were looking for this healing factor. We were looking to say someone to say that to us while we were in the pandemic and while we were isolated, and you don't need to be in the pandemic to feel isolated either. It's and that, I'm glad in a way that I had something honest to say during this debut album, because of course, even musically it could have just been another album I've done with a band, but I felt like I had something very honest and very important to say, and I'm glad with Sylvain that I found the perfect voice to do it.
Yeah, seems like. So hopefully you're able to keep that collaboration going for future projects. But also, I guess there's the idea of, hey, with all this notice and all this success, there's going to be talk of a tour. I hope.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, there will be. Of course, to bring there's a lot of moving pieces. Obviously, none. Again, I'm mentioning it again, but nothing was planned. And we're already talking about booking shows, and we want to bring in a live experience. There's a lot of jazz influences in our music, and how about we dial that to 11? How about we? There's a lot of jamming sessions in the middle of the songs. Bridges that can become a little bit longer, a lot more jazzing, a lot more, putting the horns and the reeds and the saxophones and everyone more front and center live in a live aspect, because again, it's important that they're part of DNA and not just someone that kind of comes in for a couple of measures and leaves. That's not what we're aiming for. So that experience, we're definitely bringing it live. We're working really hard on it, and I'm guessing that next year would be a great jumpstart with a couple of tours, a couple of shows, and I'm just wishing the best and hoping for the best.
Yeah, yeah. It's because when you've got, and I'm guessing you're hoping to bring all the collaborators of the album together, so they're
They're all over the place. Yeah.
a little bit, I guess. Exactly. How far flung are they?
Well, James Norrell, he's in the U.S. Ronaldo Acande is from Argentina, Chile. I've got the clarinet player, Koryapian. He's in Russia. He Andy Tilson, of course, is in England. Leo Estals, he's from France. So a lot of moving pieces, as I've said, but also I think in a realistic world, we're also gonna work with people who are available at that time as well. The soul of the Anchoret is going to be Sylvain and myself, and whoever the collaborator can, as much as I want to. I know that it might not be realistic. Everyone's extremely busy. I'm looking at Andy, who's releasing his like 13th or 14th album. He's a prog rock legend. He's royalty in my mind. But the one thing that I really want to do is meet all these beautiful people, and I'd love to, in some capacity. So maybe invite them over for one gig, for one show, or not. Invite them over for a bigger gig. We're looking at what's available. We're looking at what's realistic as well, because it's that's the good thing that the pandemic did bring. I felt like you mentioned it, is that everyone kind of had the time to Sergeant Pepper their music, go all out and do impossible things without expecting to go maybe on tour. And also labels also are taking chances for bands that are mixing things up a little bit more than usual. I think that's the big positive that post-pandemic brought into the music industry. But the bad aspect of it is that touring is as tough, or it's tougher than it ever was.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of bands, a lot of friends that are really struggling. I was extremely surprised to see The Agonist call it quits, which is a huge band here in Montreal and I think worldwide. Um, so it's a tough world out there, but we are working hard to bringing it live 100%. It's
Yeah.
it's gonna happen.
And that'll be another, I guess, interesting evolution in the Anchoret, in the idea that you've collaborated with these people, you've made music together, and you've done it really, really well. And you've done it all without ever playing together in the same room. So that's that other part when you talk about adding jazz elements and things like that. That's suggestive of some improvisation, and that certainly is one of those things where I guess now you're going to get to hopefully experience what it's like to do that with one another, to be able to play off of one another and get to understand uh, all those little elements you bring to a live performance, and make it to an extent maybe something even a little bit different than it was in the album, I suppose.
It will be, yeah. I'm thinking that having that jazz soul, having that improvisation is key part, because that's the backbone of the whole album, right? Placeholders are placeholders. The drums were written the way that the drums were written, and even though I spent countless hours on it, they're never going to be the same as the improvisational part, where the transitions of the drums and all that, like. And I'm looking to live it live as well, having fun with it. See masters play at it, collaborating with new amazing people, meeting, you know, bringing people together, seeing what comes out of it. It's part of the whole human experience, but also as a musician, that's what you're looking for. Um, and we're also thinking about not using, for example, a click track, going all out with the non-metally aspect of it. So we'll see how that goes as well. And we're talking about a very, band that's basically barely just released a debut album. So I don't think we're gonna have much, time to play live on stage as well. As much as I'd like to improvise for 3 hours straight, I'm thinking that we should keep it to 30 minutes, and hopefully that's 2 songs. In the prog world, that's
That is the
that's
Prog
the best.
tradition.
Yeah, it's prog tradition, exactly.
Let's want to take it to Neil Morse levels, and it's one song.
We're not there yet, but maybe one day.
That is the ultimate pinnacle there. I think somewhere along the line, he's going to work his way towards a 45-minute or full 60-minute uninterrupted song, which, depending on who's in the band with him, they may be like, dude, can you let us rest?
You see them like sweating. They're not the same people when they started. They're different people at the end of the song. Yeah.
So curious too. I mean, I imagine as much as you were feeling good about what you were hearing and what was coming back to you in the collaborations, did you have any inkling at that point in time that you had something special that was going to get this reaction, this critical reaction? And I'm going to hope, I don't know why not, because a lot of the critics I'm seeing are fans of Prog as well. But this reaction from the people out there is, how prepared were you to get these reactions and these reviews?
Zero, and I keep saying it, and it feels like I'm acting. It feels like it's something that I'm saying to kind of stay humble, but it's absolutely humbling. I'm overwhelmed. I really did think I'm going to piss off everyone, and I got a little bit more confidence when I saw Andy Tillison joining in, and James Christopher Norrell pitching in his Berkeley skill, Berkeley chops into the mix as well. And I started being, maybe they're bored. It's the pandemic after all. I always had that little voice. It's just that person that I was, I guess. But the way the album is, I'm overwhelmed, honestly. The way that the album is perceived, and it's loved and it's shared, and it's I'm part of. I never expected to be here on the journey. I was overwhelmed and humbling experience throughout the whole thing. There's not even funny stories when we did get signed by Willowtip. I kind of said, "Are you sure?" Because are you sure we kind of fit the roster? Are you sure this is interesting? And it was a shot in the dark. How did that come? It's something that we always dream about. I always wanted to be a signed band and never expected it to be Willowtip Records, who is synonymous for quality records to me. And I've known and followed them since like the Arsis days. Heard about the Necrophagist album release too. So I've been following them for a while, and all the heavier stuff, all the really forward thinking, more progressive, but definitely more heavy stuff. And then I saw in the roster bands like Perius and bands like An Abstract Illusion, who I am 100% thinking that it's thanks to them they've opened the floodgates to bands that have more of a progressive route, like us. They've opened the floodgates for us, gave us a fighting chance. And I sent an email in the dark at midnight, woke up the next morning, had that conversation. So it's dumb luck. Maybe the stars were aligned, and but I wasn't sure. And I never expected. And then after when that album was announced to launch, I was like, "Are you sure that Willowtip fans are gonna enjoy this album with maybe half a blast beat throughout like its 1 hour runtime?" And maybe this is the album that people needed to hear or wanted to hear at that moment of time.
I don't see why not. Again, so far, 2023 really has been an embarrassment of riches in terms of prog, and especially new artists and new music. And like yours is one of several debut albums that really just hit hard and are getting attention. And to an extent, I think, maybe the world's starting to come around to prog. I realize it's not the hip thing always, but at some point in time, things that aren't hip become hip. And trust me, again, child of the 80s, D&D, Lord of the Rings, Rush, Doctor Who, dude, they're all hip now.
They're all hip now.
They're all absolutely worldwide phenomenons, and they are hip. So, one, it just proves what I've always said. I'm always right. It just takes the world a while to catch up. But
I absolutely agree. They were always hip. It's just the world kind of catches up, And I think maybe they're catching up to prog as well. It's funny. Crownlands releases a new Rush album, which is fantastic. Beyond, it's crazy. No Spoon is album of the year in my mind. With Ocrist as well. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, but they're blown. Where did they come from? And it's incredible. And just being mentioned sometimes in the same list as those amazing albums, I'm just it's crazy. I think that people are coming around for prog, even judging by bands like Avenged Sevenfold, who just released a prog album, because why not? I guess I kind of started following them in the stage, and I was like, this reminds me of David Bowie, a lot. And I think I was right, because they just came up with Life is But a Dream, and that's, crazy album. Very good. Sleep Token also kind of meshes up. It's like one of those bands that everyone talks about, and they mix and match a lot of elements, Another one, Holocene from the Ocean Collective.
Yeah.
Blew me away. It reminds me, they mixed a lot of elements that are, synths, for example, it's something new, and they reminded me of another group called Archive, which is like more of a poppy kind of, band, but they experiment a lot. They're like a more poppy Radiohead, I guess. So yeah, maybe maybe we got lucky, and this is the perfect year to release the kind of music that we did. Maybe next year would not have been. Maybe the year before would not have been either. But stars were aligned, I guess.
I have seen the seemingly unthinkable happen this year, where, and granted, it was local, it wasn't national, but nonetheless, a New York City TV station interviewing John Petrucci during their news broadcast. Hold on. wait, Prague is on TV? What's happening here? What's and like this is prime time. This is people are awake and we're seeing this. What's happening?
They also
Like my
got a
world is
Grammy.
changing.
Yeah, they also
Right?
got a Grammy, well deserved too. So
Only 30 years late, but sure.
absolutely, but they still got it. The
Yeah.
world, as you said, the world is catching up. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. It starts to feel that way. And it all started with blah, blah, blah during the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame speech by Alex Lifeson, I would say.
Okay.
I don't know if you've
Yeah,
ever seen that speech, but
yeah, it was actually blah blah blah. It was fantastic.
a moment of one word brilliance. And,
Man, a
like,
few words.
yes,
True to
God bless
his
him.
name.
God bless him. I loved every minute of that. But yeah, so maybe that's time, and that's where I think in some ways I'm surprised to hear you were worried you were going to piss people in the Prague community off, but I get it. I think your experience was that you maybe encountered people who had a narrow idea of what Prague should sound like. And I always think you're not the only one that's experienced it that way either. I've talked to other, musicians who have said the same thing where they felt, people seem to have like this, blinders on of what Prague's supposed to be, and I can do something else besides that. Yes, you can. Guess what? That's called being progressive. That's what's intended, that you do different things, that you go in other directions, that you, as I will say in my slogan for my show, deviate from the norm, push the boundaries. Like this is what Prague is meant to be, which means, guess what? If it sounds really different, then you're probably doing it right.
Yeah. And if you're pissing some people off, then you're definitely doing something right. That's the
Yeah.
classic, the classic kind of balance. I had this question in another interview saying, your music is, or even it's a criticism at some point too, that your music isn't pushing boundaries. It's not really progressive, but what is progressive? I
Yeah.
guess ours is more of an exercise in restraint more than anything. We kind of leave a lot of room and, to kind of to breathe through with, improvisational stuff here and there. Maybe that's the prog aspect, but I never set out to do a prog album. That wasn't what I wanted. I just wanted Crime of the Century with my metal roots. And then I got bored of that, and I said, how about we throw in a little bit of Opeth mixed with Dark Side of the Moon, and that became what it became.
Yeah.
Not and is Pink Floyd progressive? Is it today? I guess yeah, but is it really when it came out? I don't think so. So I guess progressive to me is just, or at least the aspect for progressive music, for our progressive element in our music, is the fact that it's the journey. You go from point A to point B, and you go through all these like maze like places. It's not your average 3 minutes songs. I've never set out to make a long song. It just so happens because that's what the song needed to say, kind of thing. So I guess if your music has journey, and if you have something honest to say, to me, that's prog.
Yeah.
I don't feel like you should play a million notes a minute to be considered prog. And I didn't have that vision at all. I honestly, maybe I would have if I could have, but unfortunately, I'm not John Petrucci. So
Who is?
I can't.
Who is these days?
Exactly.
It's always been my thought process as well. Is you look back and okay, so you want to look at the classic period of Prague. There, you have say Yes and ELP, who are shredding and the complexity and the time signature changes and this, that, and the other. But then at the same time, you would have Pink Floyd, which was more artsy and feel and textures and things like that, but always with these overarching themes that are going through the songs. It wasn't always about technical brilliance. And on any given day, I will take a David Gilmour over an Yngwie Malmsteen without even thinking hard about it, because of what he can do, not just with the notes, but with the space between the notes. And that's an important skill, and restraint is something I've talked about with people before. It's not to be minimized in terms of its importance in music and being creative. And even these modern days, yeah, you've got your dream theaters, who are going to burn your eyebrows off with their technical brilliance from song to song. And you're going to have your porcupine trees that are going to float in with much more texture and a little bit more nuance. And yeah, okay, once in a while Steven gets pissed and he'll start to shred a little bit. But for the most part, they're more about, in many ways, that kind of more restrained composition. I mean, especially like if you compare Jordan Rudess, and his rock god, guitar hero style of playing keyboards, and now I'm going to blank on his name, but Porcupine Tree's keyboard player, totally out of my head right now because I wanted it and I didn't think of it ahead of time, but his style, which I compare to, dude looking for where he put his keys down. Like I watched him just kind of wander from table to table, keyboard to keyboard, not nudging a thing here, nudging a thing there. It did not look like he was putting in quite the workout that Jordan puts in. And
yeah, and it's, you need both. You need both. You absolutely need both in the life. And to me, like it's funny, but one of my favorite keyboard uses, or SIDS, is in Rammstein of all places, because I hear the music, I'm imagining myself as like the producer or someone, doing the keyboards on that, and I have no idea what to do. Like, you can't play a solo, you just create textures, and it's incredible what, I was going to say Flea, but it's not Flea. But what he does, it's absolutely incredible. Also, I grew up listening to Linkin Park, which is probably one of my first, bands that I listened to as a kid, that I loved. And Linkin Park's production is off. It's crazy. It's something, it should be top of mind for anyone actually, going into layers and building layers in music. And those, bands we don't necessarily think of right away. We think about Jordan Rudess. So of course, that's the keyboard god. He's also better than me on guitar, 100%. But then again, you need that contrast with, more subdued and synth based, more room, more airy stuff. And I'm glad that both exist.
Yeah.
And I think they will always exist. I'm hoping that maybe we can have both in the same song with the Anchoret, but we'll see.
Go for it. That's what I love about Prog, especially the long songs, the various movements and sections within. That just has always appealed to me quite a bit. So we've spent all this time talking about music, but there was one other aspect of your life I thought I wanted to touch on before we wrap this up. But I was just very curious because, when you mentioned that the animations for the videos were yours. So I'm going, wait, okay, so he's got this other talent pool, this other aspect of life besides being a musician. And, I had to check it out, of course, and it's pretty cool. I managed to have it here. I'll throw it up here, but tell me about this a little bit. Tell me, like, how do we get from A to B with all of this? I'm very curious.
Oh, I see you part of the video game we're working on. Again, it's all sorts of collaboration with people. I was thinking the journey of the astronaut. The astronaut is something that's been absolutely overused in Prog. Of course, we're not the first ones. We're definitely not the last one. And I've always kind of attributed to the fact that, I think the Apollo missions were always inspiring for Prog. That thing started, polluting TV at that time. And right. I can guarantee you that all musicians were starting to look to the sky and to the moon and be like, okay, this is really inspiring. We're going charting something new in the world. And it still inspires me. But in our cases, I kind of have a twist on the astronaut character, and the astronaut character is actually I call him Id because he's the Id in the Forsaken video clip, for example. The song, it talks about isolation, but in my mind, that song was always about, more specifically, Alzheimer's, more specifically dementia. And the video clip represents that, to me at least. It's Id, the astronaut, flying through memories that are being broken down, being destroyed, on fire, increasingly, until at the end, the last thing to burn out, and it's the id, it's yourself person who you are, and that's the astronaut. That's how it kind of.
Oh wow.
So that character was created. We're far from being, the mascot. It's not Iron Maiden's Ed, but it's the Anchoret's id. That was the joke. That's where it kind of came from. So I had also, I've been speaking with Andy, and I've been speaking with um, Sylvain, and they're from a different generation, and they from a different generation where you sit down and you have a vinyl and you put that on and you listen to it, and then when side A finishes, you put side B. Then that's all you do. That's all you do. I'm more of a generation. I have to have a fidget spinner. I have to do something with my hands. I have to do something. Unfortunately, that's where it is. And I do have vinyls, and I enjoy that, but I definitely am playing catch up with all these people who kind of absolutely love it way more than me, and been doing it forever, and that's kind of their like little time, um, and I was thinking about just that idea of what's my generation's listening to vinyl and doing only that. I immediately thought of video games. I'm a big gamer myself, obviously, but I like stories. I just always do. And so I tried, and the tools are available now. Most of the tools are free as well. You just have to put in the time, the effort. Tutorials are everywhere.
Wow.
You can also have help from Fiverr. There's all sorts of apps out there. And I just decided on building this, like I said, fidget spinner, like a
Yeah.
walking simulator of just doing something while the album is being played in the back. And you're basically making your own video clip.
Yeah.
You're lost on a planet, and there's not much to do, but you're doing something by walking around, jumping around, and you
Finding arms in
experience
the sand.
arms in the sand. There's maybe a couple of other Easter eggs in there. By the time you finish two Easter eggs, more than half of the album is complete.
Right.
And that's a totally different way of consuming music too. And this is not something that is going to be up on sale. This is going to be free. This is going to be on your cell phone. It's going to be on your computer if you want. Still
cool.
trying to figure that out, but it's just doing something with your hands while you're listening to the music, because to me, that's my generations of listening to vinyl music.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, I do miss the days of getting a new album and sitting and reading the lyrics while listening to it. That's what I would do. And when I got done listening or reading the lyrics, or in between the points where I needed to read the lyrics, I was reading the liner notes. And that's how I got a lot of information and made a lot of connections from band to band, when you start realizing, wait a minute, I've seen that name before. And liner notes are a place where you learn names like Mel Collins, saxophonist in the 70s and 80s, or the bassist with the world's greatest name, Pino Palladino.
Yeah.
Session bassist who got around. Him and Tony Levin were the two guys who, if there was a session bassist, it was usually one of them.
Yeah.
They got around. This, of course, I noticed it was interesting as I was getting it loaded in to fiddle around with it on my computer, and noticed it was the Unreal engine that was running this. And I'm going, wow, yes. Okay, so I'm among those that were the OGs for Unreal, because played the original game from which the engine was based back when it was new, and things like that. But at the same time, he put me in mind for some reason. I saw this, and I saw the album cover, and the first thing came to my mind, and this is one, dating myself, as if I haven't done that already. And two, it's probably before your time, but you may have heard of it, but the animated film Heavy Metal.
Yes, of course. Then there was Heavy Metal 2000. Yeah, I'm lucky enough to have a father that showed me all his collections and all, and he was pretty much a geek too. So, he showed me a lot of these things, and of course, yeah, it's definitely, I didn't think about heavy metal, but creating it, but I definitely see it. And there's a lot of homages in the whole. I did the graphic design for the CD and the vinyl as well. But I have to admit that I've stumbled upon the amazing work by Giuseppe Lorza, who did the cover art. And that cover art spoke to me on so many levels, because it has that kind of homage to old prog albums, that maybe category scene where it's a little tongue-in-cheek because it's serious when you look at it. It's about isolation. I think it's pretty obvious. It has that astronaut, which is very prog,
Sure.
but it's also kind of funny, at the same time, very tongue-in-cheek. And that escapism, I think, is my favorite aspect of just prog music in general. It could be the most dramatic thing ever, but then Haken throws in a little bit of a circus, bridge in there, and I love it. That's what it's all about.
Besides being great guys, Haken will always have my heart simply for the fact that they made their own Muppets for a video.
Yes, I know.
Commitment, it has to be admired.
It's Cockroach King, right? Yeah.
Yes.
that album, that whole album, The Mountain, is just, it's just like this big journey, and then there's the Cockroach King, which is just, don't forget to smile once in a while through the journey, kind of a reminder. Love it.
Yeah, it absolutely was perfect. Went ahead and looked up out online how to make Muppets and made their own. All right. Yeah.
That's pretty much how I looked up online and saw how to make a video game and made my own,
Yeah. Or something, anything brilliant, anything unusual. Devin Townsend pulling out a theremin for live performance. Like, okay, you know what? Now I've come to the conclusion, if you don't have a theremin, you may not be relevant anymore. Got to have a theremin.
I'm taking notes. I'm here you go. I'm just writing it down right here.
Taking notes. Theremin on album 2.
We'll start with that. Then it's going to go into a little bit of an homage to Star Trek, maybe. You have to. If you have a theremin, you have to. You have to. Yeah. You can't not.
And the greatest quote after showing that off to the audience was, "Hey, pretty cool, right? It's $400. Buy a t-shirt."
Devin Townsend, I remember when he came in with a strapping young lad and he's like, "You guys are ugly." And that stuck with me all my life. And he had like the half dreads thing going on. Beautiful.
The man is a performer. Absolutely.
Yep.
So, well, Ed, dude, it's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed meeting you and talking with you about this. Because again, I'm into prog because I love discovery, and the Anchoret is another one of the great discoveries I've had so far this year. But it's so cool hearing everything that was behind it, and how you came about pulling that together and just getting to know a little bit more about the person and in the creator's seat for that.
Thank you. Likewise, Dave. Thank you for having me on the show and giving me the opportunity to talk. I had such a blast. It was so fun. Thank you for going over, and you gave me a note, no theremin, and I'll hold you up to that for sure.
All right. I expect a note in the credit liner for credit liner, album liner. Mm-hmm.
Close enough.
I think the warranty in my mouth may be running out for the evening, so maybe a good time to wrap up here before I say something really dumb. But anyway, thank you again. I appreciate your time and continued luck with the album. I am so glad it's getting the reception it is. It's much deserved, and I really look forward to hopefully seeing you and some version of the band come around on tour here in the States. If you're in the Philly area, shoot me a line, let me know. Be a great thing to see you guys perform. Even if it's 2 songs for half an hour or 1 song for half an hour. It's all good.
We'll do our best. 100%. It's definitely on the table, and we're working hard on bringing it to on the road for sure. Thank you very much, Dave, for having me.
You're welcome. Take care. Best wishes. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, what a great interview. I told you, engaging young man, multi-talented, and what a great album. He's rave reviews everywhere. The Anchoret is absolutely taking off, making a big splash, along with some other bands this year. It's been a very, very healthy year in the world of prog and prog metal. I'm digging it. I love seeing these young lads coming up and being influenced by not just the bands of the classic era in the 70s, but the modern day masters of prog, like our friends Steven Wilson and Neil Morse and Mike Portnoy and Dream Theater and Opeth, and all of that is so awesome. Really loving it. So thank you once again, Ed Levitsky of the Anchoret. I really appreciate your time, man. Wish you the best of luck with the album, and absolutely looking forward to seeing you on tour. I hope that's going to be happening soon. Meanwhile, the rest of you, do me a favor. Hit the subscribe, hit the little bell thing so you get a notification when more videos come up. They'll come up as they do. I can't promise things will be regular because I get interviews when I can get them. We may be adding other things to the channel down the road, so bear with me. It's all under construction, as I noted. Check me out in the socials, Facebook, Instagram. You will find us. Threads on there as well. And the rubble that is X/Twitter. Still there. Check out. Look up for Bleeding Edge, with or without underscores. Just too many to list here. Look for them in the description below. So there you go, as well as a link to the Anchoret and their website and all that kind of fun stuff. All right, folks. Until next time, this is Super Dave signing off.